Now read this.
Hello, and welcome back to Now Read This, Taran Wanderer, The Chronicles of Prydain, Book 4, Chapter 15, The Open Cage. Throughout summer and fall, the three had worked unstintingly to finish the cottage, their only refuge against the oncoming winter. Now, as the first snow whirled from the heavy sky to powder the crags with dry white flakes, it was done. The walls of new stone rose firm and solid, the roof had been thatched anew and tightly chinked against wind and weather. Within, a fire cheerily blazed in the new hearth. The wooden benches had been mended, the door no longer sagged on broken hinges. Though Craddock had given himself unsparingly to the toil, the cottage, for the most part, was Taran's labour. The rusted tools, sharpened and refurbished, served him to make what other tools he needed. The planning as well as the doing had been his, and as he stood in the dooryard, the fine snow clinging like chaff to his uncropped hair, it was not without pride that he watched the smoke rising from the rebuilt chimney. Craddock had come to stand beside him, and the herdsman put a hand fondly on Taran's shoulder. For a time neither spoke, but at the last Craddock said, "For all the years I strove to keep what was mine, it is mine no longer." His bearded face furrowed in a smile. "Ours," he said. Taran nodded, but made no further answer. Since the winter tasks were short, the brief days seemed longer. Evenings by the fire, to while away the time, Craddock told of his youth, of his settling in the valley. As the herdsman spoke of his hopes and hardships, Taran's admiration quickened, and for the first time he saw Craddock as a man who had not been unlike himself. Thus, at Craddock's urging, Taran was willing to tell of his days at Caerdalban and all that had befallen him. Craddock's face brightened with fatherly pride as he heard of these adventures. Yet often Taran would stop in the midst of his recounting, when memories of Eilonwy and all his lifelong past would surge suddenly and break upon him like a wave. Then would he break off abruptly, turn his face away, and stare at the fire. Those times Craddock pressed him to speak no further. A bond of affection, born of their common toil, had grown among all three. Craddock never failed to treat Gurgie with much kindness and gentleness, and the creature, more than ever pleased with his duties as shepherd, was well content. But once, at the beginning of winter, Craddock spoke apart with Taran, saying, "Since the day you came to dwell here, I have called you my son, yet never have you called me father." Taran bit his lips. At one time he had yearned to shout aloud his bitterness, to fling it angrily in the herdsman's face. It still tormented him, but now he could not bring himself to wound the feelings of one he scorned as a father, yet honoured as a man. Seeing Taran's distress, Craddock nodded briefly. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps one day you shall." Snow turned the grey summits glistening white, yet the tall peaks Taran once had seen as bars now shielded the valley from the brunt of the storms, and against the wolf wind howling through the ice-bound passes, the cottage stood fast. Late of an afternoon, when Craddock and Gurgie had gone to see the flock, the gale sharpened, and Taran set about stretching a heavier sheepskin across the narrow window. He had only begun when the door was flung open as though ripped from its hinges. Shouting frantically, Gurgie burst into the cottage. "Help! Oh, help, kindly master! Come with hastenings!" Gurgie's face was pale as ashes. His hands shook violently as he clutched at Taran's arm. "Master, master, follow Gurgie! Quickly, oh, quickly!" Taran dropped the sheepskin, hurriedly donned a fleece jacket, and, as Gurgie moaned and wrung his hands, snatched up a cloak and raced through the open door. Outside, the wind caught at him and nearly flung him backward. Gurgie pressed on, wildly waving his arms. Taran bent forward against the gale and ran beside his desperate companion, stumbling across the snow-swept field. At the edge of the pasture they had cleared during the summer, The land fell sharply away into stony slopes, and he followed close behind Gurgi as the creature scrambled past a rocky draw, then along a twisting path where he soon halted. Taran gasped in dismay as Gurgi, whimpering fearfully, pointed downward. A narrow ledge jutted from the sheer side of the gorge. A figure, arms outflung, lay motionless, one leg twisted under his body, partly covered with fallen stones. It was Craddock. "Gone with stumblings," Gurgi moaned. "Oh, miserable Gurgi could not save him from slippings." He clapped his hands to his head. Too late for helpings." Taran's head spun with shock. Grief struck him like a sword. But then, beyond his will, terrifying in its sudden onrush, a wild sense of freedom flooded him as though rising from the most hidden depths of his heart. In one dizzying glance, he seemed to see his cage of stone crumble. The still form on the ledge stirred painfully and lifted an arm. "He lives!" Taran cried. "Oh, master, how do we save him?" Gurgi wailed. "Terrible crags are steep, even bold Gurgi fears to climb down." "Is there no way?" Taran exclaimed. "He's badly hurt, dying perhaps. We cannot leave him." He pressed his fists to his reeling forehead. "Even if we could make our way to him, how should we bear him up? If we fail, not one life lost, but 3. His hands were shaking. It was not despair that filled him, but terror, black terror, at the thoughts whispering in his mind. Was there the slimmest hope of saving the stricken herdsman? If not, even Prince Gwydion would not reproach Taran's decision, nor would any man. Instead, they would grieve with him at his loss. Free of his burden, free of the valley, the door of his cage burst wide, and all his life awaited him. Eilonwy, Caer Dalban. He seemed to hear his own voice speak these words, and he listened in shame and horror. Then, as if his heart would burst with it, he cried out in terrible rage, "What man am I?" Blind with fury at himself, he sprang down the slope and clawed for a handhold among the ice-covered stones, while Gurgi, panting fearfully, clamoured after him. Taran's numbed fingers clutched vainly at an outcropping as a rock gave way beneath his feet. Downward he pitched and cried out as a jagged stone drove against his chest. Black suns burst in his head, and he choked with pain. Above, Gurgi was sliding down in a shower of ice and pebbles. Taran's heart pounded. He was on the ledge. Craddock lay within arm's reach. Taran crawled to his side. Blood streamed down Craddock's brow as the herdsman struggled to raise his head. Son, he gasped, "you have lost your life for me." "Not so," Taran answered. "Don't try to move. We'll find a way to bring you to safety." He raised himself to his knees. Craddock was even more grievously hurt than Taran had feared. Carefully, he lifted away the heavy stones and shale that pressed against the herdsman and gently drew him closer to the protecting force of the cliff. Gurgi had dropped to the ledge and scurried to join Taran. Master, he cried. "Gurgi sees a pathway upward, but it is steep, oh steep, with dangers of hurtful stumblings and tumblings." Taran glanced at where the creature pointed. Amid the rocks and snow-filled crevices, he could make out a narrow passageway, free of ice. Yet, as Gurgi had warned, it rose nearly straight up. One man at a time could scale it, but what of 2, burdened with a 3rd? He gritted his teeth. The sharp stone had wounded him sorely as a blade, and each breath he drew filled his lungs with fire. He gestured for Gurgi to lay hold of Craddock's legs, while he edged unsteadily along the sheer drop and slid his hands under the herdsman's shoulders. As gently as the companion strove to lift him, Craddock cried out in agony, and they were forced to halt, fearful their efforts would do him further harm. A wind had risen, screaming through the valley, lashing at the companions, and nearly tearing them from the ledge. Once more they struggled to bear Craddock to the upward passage, and once more fell back as the gale battered them. The early twilight had begun deepening, and shadows filled the gorge. The face of the cliff wavered before Taran's eyes. His legs trembled as he forced himself again to lift the herdsman. "Leave me," Craddock murmured hoarsely. "Leave me. You'll waste your own strength." "Leave you?" Taran burst out. "What son forsakes his own flesh and blood?" Hearing this, Craddock smiled for an instant. Then his face grew taut in anguish. "Save yourselves," he whispered. "You are my father," Taran replied. I stay." "No!" the herdsman cried out with all his strength. "Do as I ask, and go from here. Heed me now, or it will be too late. The duty of kinship, you owe me none. No bond of blood holds you." "How then?" Taran gasped, staring wildly at the herdsman. His head spun, and he clutched at the ledge. "How then? Do you tell me I am not your son?" Craddock looked at him a moment, his eyes unwavering. "Never have I been false to any man, save once, to you." "A lie?" Taran stammered in dismay. "Did you lie to me then? Or do you lie to me now?" "Half-truth is worse than a lie," Craddock answered brokenly. "Hear me, hear this part of the truth. Yes, long past, as he journeyed through Prydain, Dalbin sheltered with me, but of what he sought he never spoke." "The child," Taran cried. "There was none." "There was," Craddock answered. "A son, our firstborn, even as I told you. He did not live beyond the day of his birth. His mother died with him," he murmured. "And you, I needed your strength to keep what remained to me. I saw no other way. Even as I spoke the lie, I was ashamed, then more ashamed to speak the truth. When your companion left, I could only hope that you would follow with him, and gave you freedom to do so. You chose to stay. But this, as well, it is true," Craddock said hurriedly. "At first I leaned upon you as my crutch, because you served my need, but no father came to love a son more dearly." Taran's head sank to his breast. He could not speak, and his tears blinded him. Craddock, who had half raised himself, fell back to the stones of the ledge. "Go from here," he murmured. Taran's hand dropped to his side. His fingers touched the rim of the battle horn. With a sudden cry he straightened. Eilongwi's horn! Unthinkingly, he had slung it about his shoulder when he had run from the cottage. Hastily he drew it from beneath his cloak. The summons to the fair folk, the call he had treasured. It alone could save Craddock. He stumbled to his feet. The ledge seemed to sway beneath him. The notes Dolly had taught him blurred in his mind, and he strove desperately to recall them. Suddenly they rang once more in his memory. He raised the horn to his lips. The notes sprang loud and clear, and even before the signal faded, the wind caught them and seemed to fling the call through all the valley, where it returned in echo after echo. Then whirling shadows engulfed him, and Taran dropped to the ledge. How long they clung there he did not know, whether moments or hours. He was only dimly aware of strong hands bearing him up, of a rope lashed about his waist. He glimpsed vaguely, as between the flickering of a dark flame, the broad faces of dwarfish mountaineers, whose numbers he could not judge. When next he opened his eyes, he was in the cottage, the fire blazing, Gurgi beside him. Taran started up. Pain seared his chest, which he saw had been carefully bandaged. "The signal," he murmured feebly. "It was answered." "Yes, yes," Gurgi cried. "Fair folk save us with mighty haulings and heavings. They bind up kindly masters' hurtful wounds, and leave healing herbs for all that is needful." "The summons," Taran began. "Good old Dolly, he warned me not to waste it. For Craddock's sake, I'm glad I kept it as long as I did. Craddock, where is he? How does he fare?" He stopped suddenly. Gurgi was looking at him silently. The creature's face wrinkled miserably, and tears stood in his eyes as he bowed his shaggy head. Taran fell back. His own cry of anguish rang in his ears. Beyond that was only darkness.
Hey, you want to buy something? You can check the description for my books and audiobooks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.